You can just see it, Kristen Welker, in all the body language. This is the momentum that they've been looking for. This was a moment that they've been pointing toward. This was the deliverable that this president is ready to go out there and sell. Talking about being in New Hampshire tomorrow, Detroit the next day, and barnstorming, really, the country with the vice president, both their spouses, and the cabinet.
You're absolutely right, Nicole. This is significant for so many reasons. This is the president's largest legislative achievement to date, and it fulfills two key campaign promises. One, to pass an infrastructure bill, and two, to do so with bipartisan support. And as you pointed out so well at the top, Nicole, the fact that you have a number of Republicans there. We heard from Rob Portman, Lisa Murkowski, also there, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney. They did so despite the fact that they have come under attack from members of their own party for being there, for being at the White House today to celebrate this achievement. But there are still some real challenges ahead for this president. He's going to be on the road, as he talked about tomorrow in New Hampshire, at a bridge, trying to explain what he has just passed now to the American people, trying to explain to them how it's going to ultimately, he will argue, help their lives, not only for the infrastructure piece of it, but because it will create jobs. That's what you're going to hear from the president tomorrow when he's on the road, and he teed that up today. But the hard work begins when it comes to the second piece of his agenda, that larger $1.75 trillion spending and climate plan. It is due potentially to be voted on in the House this week, but not certain that that's going to happen. And it comes against the backdrop of rising inflation. So you have moderates like Senator Joe Manchin saying, hey, wait a minute, should we be spending more at a time when inflation is going up, when prices are increasing on everything from groceries to gas? So that is a potential hurdle moving forward. And of course, it comes against the backdrop of the president's approval rating, which has been dipping a new low this week, 41%. But images like this, Nicole, on the South Lawn, I don't have to tell you the power of that, the ability of this president, of this White House to say we have now checked the box on some of our biggest campaign promises, Nicole.
Claire, I do not hold up for as heroic, but it needs to be underscored, something Kristen's pointing out. Rob Portman wasn't just there, he spoke. And I know he's retiring. And again, I am not handing out courage medals to any Republicans on these airwaves ever, I promise. But that he was there is exactly what Biden needs right now. What impact do you think that has? And do you think they had to do any, the Portman I used to know would want to be there because he used to care about governing. But just talk about the importance for this president of that image.
Well, I listen, kudos to Rob for being there. I'm not going to give him a whole bunch of medals at this point because he is retiring. But importantly, there were Republicans there that aren't retiring. Shelley Moore Capito was right behind the president and he signed that bill. She's not retiring, and she's from West Virginia. I think we all know who the other senator from West Virginia is. She's the Republican from West Virginia, and she took the step of saying this is the right thing to do. And did you notice the president name dropped Mitch McConnell? That was very smart because he's reminding the country the top leader, the top elected leader of the Republican Party on Capitol Hill supported this bill. So Trump can do all he wants to do, and the people that are encouraging this horrible threat of violence that many of these Republicans are facing, that's a big deal that Mitch McConnell was actually mentioned by the president, and that Mitch McConnell, nobody is punishing anybody in the Republican caucus on the Senate side because their leader was for the bill.
Charlie, I want to come back to the president's remarks. He has this Herculean task now of making sure people understand that the good things they start to see happening in their communities, they tie back to this piece of legislation that this president has fought for and held this pretty fragile bipartisan coalition together to get to today. What did you hear today that in your view sort of bears repeating?
Well, there was a lot that bears repeating, and this is really the beginning of what's going to have to be, as you point out, a Herculean sales job explaining what's in this, but also thematically that you're talking about jobs, you're talking about making America competitive. You're talking about the need to say, look, this country used to be number one. We want to make it number one again. Our position vis-a-vis China. These are all powerful messages that haven't broken through because over the last several months, unfortunately, Democrats have spent most of the time debating among themselves. And I think that you would hope that over the last couple of weeks, seeing some of these poll numbers, including the fact that Republicans may have opened up a double-digit lead on the generic ballot. I mean, think about that for a moment, considering how nihilistic they have been, how reckless they have been, how obstructionist they have been, and yet they are leading in the polls. I think the Democrats need to engage in some introspection, that they have been focused on their own differences rather than making the case to the American people of what they are delivering, and also holding Republicans accountable for the fact that they are not, with the exception of the handful that were there today, actually addressing any of these problems. I thought when President Biden said, we see you and we hear you, we are trying to deal with the problems that exist in your life, in the real world, that's a potential real contrast between people trying to get things done and the kind of gamesmanship that you're seeing in Congress, including the number of Republicans that have spent the last week fighting with Big Bird as opposed to doing anything for anyone out in the actual real world.
Kristen Welker, Donald Trump tried to do this for 4 years. He may have had a thing for infrastructure, I don't really know, but it's popular. It's really, really, really popular. 62% of all Americans support this before the sales job commences. Tell me your understanding of what's in the bill.
Well, this is going to pour billions of dollars, Nicole, into roads, into bridges, into expanding broadband, which is so important because you have communities all across the country, including communities of color, that don't have access to broadband. And so they're falling behind, whether we're talking about work or education. And so that's going to be a critical piece of it. There's also going to be some money that goes potentially toward climate. And so this is a sweeping bill. And I think the question, Nicole, is about timing. How quickly can they actually get some of these projects going? How quickly can the jobs start to be created? Now, we've pressed the White House on this over and over again, and they say, look, some of the projects will get going in the next few months. For others, it's going to be a year. So I think you're going to see a variation there. But when we're talking about inflation and the need to deal with that issue and the real pain that people are feeling in their pocketbooks, obviously, the White House knows they've got to move on this. They're putting Mitch Landrieu in charge of the rollout, and that's going to be a critical piece of this. Obviously, he's got a lot on his shoulders moving forward.
Claire, same question to you. Tell me what in your view, if you were, still having to sort of shore up your political standing, what would you talk about being in this bill?
I think I'd talk, we got to remember the margins in rural America are brutal for Democrats right now. And one of the struggles has been finding the resources to get the internet out to all of the rural communities, because there wasn't a lot of money in it for the companies that were making broadband possible. This bill is going to do a lot for broadband in rural communities, and we all know that's economic development. That's a lifeline to rural communities in this country. In a state like mine, I'd be talking a lot about the broadband part of this bill and what it's going to mean to people who want to start a small business in a community where a lot of other opportunities have dried up.
And Charlie, all but 19 Republicans oppose what Claire just articulated. Tell me what pieces of this bill that was signed into law today cross-pressure the Republicans the most.
Well, I think that the kinds of things you've been talking about. Look, Americans like the idea of building things. They like the idea of building roads and bridges and making the country more competitive, putting people back to work. I think the Republicans, particularly in the House, are betting everything on opposing whatever is being done. And I think this is an opening for President Biden to say, look, we are accomplishing things. We are doing things. We want America to be back. And these other guys are proposing nothing. They are for nothing. I think he ought to turn it around and say, ask your Republican congressman or your senator who voted against this, what are you in favor of? Don't tell me what you oppose. What are you in favor of in your community? Are you against fixing the lead pipes? Are you against building and fixing these roads? Are you against transit? I mean, I think that that needs to be done here. And I think that the president did strike that note when he said, you know, people doubt that we can get things done in Washington, that there's too much bickering. And so this may be the last opportunity of his presidency to stand in front of a bipartisan audience and say, this is how Washington should work, because you get the sense that maybe the door is closing on that, and it's going to be scorched earth politics from now on. And frankly, I think the people are disgusted by that. As ironic as it might be, and it's a tough job, here's a president that can actually run against Washington dysfunction, because it's going to be very dysfunctional, I think, for the next year or so.